In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So friends, we know that we're in a pretty fierce campaign for our national offices right now. We're seeing and hearing a lot of name-calling and exaggerations. My goodness, we've witnessed 2 attempted assassinations of one candidate. We are truly living in crazy times. I think we're all ready for this campaign to come to an end. And it will come to an end when we approach the time for us to cast our vote. I want to remind everyone that as Catholic Christians, we understand that it is a moral duty to vote. It's not an option. In fact, as Catholic Christians, we understand that the call to vote is similar in terms of a civic duty as paying our taxes. We are bound morally to vote. In fact, not to vote, to purposely not vote, is actually a sin of omission. We are bound as members of this country to cast our vote. It is a civic duty, not an option, not something nice to do, but a civic duty. We are bound to vote. That is particularly important since we are now told by Pew Research that the majority of Catholics do not vote. And more extensively, we are told by statistics that the majority of Christians do not vote. Doesn't that explain a lot? Sometimes the people receive the leaders they deserve. And if the people are not willing to vote, well, then you're going to get the leader that those who do vote decide upon. So I want to encourage you to make sure that you vote. It's a moral responsibility, a duty. But with that said, we can ask, well, then who do we vote for? Sometimes our friends and our loved ones would tell us who we should vote for. We can say, I should vote for who? That person or this person? But we can't rely on the counsel or the pressure of friends or loved ones. We certainly cannot rely on the national media. It is very important that we look to our consciences. We have to understand when we say look to our conscience, we mean that our conscience, which is the place where we encounter God, is the place where we receive instruction, the place in which God gives us his wisdom. Our conscience doesn't mean I vote for whoever I want. Our conscience is an extension of our ego. The Catechism of the Catholic Church says the conscience is our sanctuary. Again, that's where we encounter God, where he teaches us, corrects us, admonishes us, heals us. So we go to our conscience, and we have to make sure that our conscience is formed on the gospel and the moral tradition that flows from it. So we go to our conscience. We hear the wisdom of God. We discern. We ask what is morally right. But sometimes that becomes difficult, doesn't it? Because when we're dealing with politics, we're not dealing with perfect candidates or perfect political parties. It's a mess. And there is rarely an excellent candidate. Oftentimes we are bound to look at the two, and as our moral tradition would say, to choose the lesser of two evils. And I want to explain that term. That's a term used in moral theology to state of affairs or in situations, or for example in political situations, when there are two situations, two options, two candidates, neither is particularly desirable or morally excellent, and yet we choose which is the lesser of the two evils. Not that any one person is evil, but simply the positions that they stand, the policies that they advocate are better or worse than their opponent. Or more broadly, if we have two state of affairs, that one situation is better morally than the other. Not that the one that is better is particularly excellent or the more desired, but of the two options presented, it's the one that is the better. We choose the lesser of two evils. This is a moral tradition, a term used in our moral tradition. So we look at the candidates, we look at the political parties, and we look where people stand on issues. We don't vote for people because of their demographics. I don't vote on someone because they're Irish Catholic, I don't vote on someone because, well, they're from a lower demographic and, they really had to fight to get them way up. They're way up, right? Just like we don't vote against someone because of their demographics. So they're rich, so I'm not going to vote for them. Or they belong to a particular racial group or a particular confessional creed, so I'm not going to vote for them. This is very important for us as Catholics because for a long time, Catholic Christians could not run for public office in the United States. Because if you were a Catholic, you were not elected. That's shocking. Many of you might have heard of the Governor Al Smith of New York. He's the one who built the Empire State Building. He ran for president, but he was a Catholic, and he was horribly, unabashedly destroyed, criticized, mocked because he was a Roman Catholic. Incidentally, they have an annual dinner in his honor, the Al Smith dinner, which normally both candidates go to. It's usually closer to the election day, and the candidates go and they poke fun at each other or at themselves. It's a comical way to kind of let out some steam. That has been a noble tradition for over 40 years until this year, when one candidate chose not to participate. That is both a real sign, a sensitive area for us as Catholics, because that Al Smith dinner meant a lot. First of all, who it's named after, but then also in terms of its purpose, because not simply is it for candidates to relax and to joke a little bit, but all that money goes to Catholic charities to serve those in need. So Al Smith was definitely not an option for running for president because he was a Catholic. So the Catholic Christians were very sensitive to the fact that anyone who would vote on someone simply because of a demographic or an identity that they have, or they're Irish, they're Catholic, they're African American, they're whatever, rich, poor. That's not how we vote. We go to our conscience, we look at the policies that are advocated by the candidate. This becomes difficult because sometimes the candidate is at odds with their national platform, the platform of their political party. So we can look at the platform of a party and then look at what the candidate stands for, and it might be at odds. It's like, wait a minute, that's the party that's endorsing this candidate. But we look at what the candidate is standing for. And then it gets even more complicated. Because we have to, as Catholics, make the distinction between what are absolute issues and what are prudential issues. So, for example, absolute moral issues, it means they are always right or they are always wrong. No circumstance, no intention can ever change them. They're absolute. And those are the highest. When we think of the hierarchy of truth, those are the highest. So, for example, abortion and euthanasia. Those are usually the two that we think of in terms of absolute moral issues. There's no state of affairs, there's no circumstance, no intention that can ever allow an abortion or an act of euthanasia to be morally permissible. Does not exist. Those are absolute. And by the way, we can, in light of the particular political commentary that we have now, we could throw IVF in that too. IVF, in vitro fertilization, so the scientific manipulation of the human power of the human person to procreate, that is an absolute moral issue. That is a violation of the very act of a human being to procreate our species. So we can throw that up there in terms of an absolute moral issue. The church takes those very seriously, as does a healthy society. So we have the absolute moral issues, but then we have the prudential issues. This is where people always get sometimes thrown off, because a prudential issue can actually have multiple right answers. You can have people of goodwill, even fellow Catholics, who disagree on how these issues should be addressed, and they can all be right, or they could all be wrong. For example, immigration. Immigration is a prudential moral issue. We can have three different groups of people have different ideas on public policy and laws for immigration, and they could all be morally permissible. That's shocking. But no, one has to be right, one has to be wrong. Well, there can be a lesser evil, or a greater good, perhaps. We have to discern that. But it's a prudential issue. And we have to be careful that we don't equate absolute moral issues with prudential moral issues. We have to make sure there's a distinction. So a Catholic could say, well, wait a minute, are you saying that I should vote for a candidate just because that candidate is supportive of life and as opposed to abortion? Yes. Yes. Yes, the killing of children is always wrong. Right? Are you saying that I should vote for a candidate because they're opposed to euthanasia? Yes. The killing of the elderly or the severely ill is always wrong. So these are absolute moral issues. Sometimes we use the term preeminent issues. This is a preeminent issue. And we should always be informed in terms of all the different issues that are at hand. What are the policies? Where does each candidate stand on all the issues? But some of the issues are predominant than others. But then we have to go back to that lesser of two evils. Because right now, neither of our candidates are pro-life. The two that are running for public office right now, for national office, neither are pro-life. Now, we can apply principles in terms of greater or lesser. But we have both candidates that support the abortion pill, both support IVF. So now we need to apply, we have to discern, well, in terms of the other parts of abortion, euthanasia, how do they stand? How we have to weigh things, right? And then we have to look at the prudential issues. What exactly is their position on a prudential issue? Both can be right or both can be wrong, but we should at least understand what exactly is their stance. And if not willing to tell us what their stance is, that itself can be a mark against that particular candidate. So the point is that we have to weigh and listen and study and try to understand. Because the casting of our vote is showing who we support. And there are more complications and more indications that come with that. So if I support someone because they're pro-abortion, and there is not another candidate, but I just vote for this person because they're pro-abortion, that can actually be a grave sin. You can actually be considered an accomplice to a grave sin because you are permitting the legalization or the public support of abortion. But it gets complicated when both candidates support some aspect of abortion. And we have to try to begin to understand and discern. There's no easy answer. This is why Mother Church always gives moral principles and then calls on the faithful to go to their conscience and to discern which of these candidates is the lesser of two evils. Which one is relatively pro-life or more pro-life than the other? Which one has better policies in terms of the prudential moral issues between the two? This leads me to an answer that the Holy Father gave in a recent interview while he was on the airplane heading back from Rome after his visits to Oceania and Asia. The CBS News reporter asked the Holy Father, "Your Holiness, you have always spoken in defense of the dignity of life. With the U.S. elections coming, what advice would you give to a Catholic voter faced with a candidate who supports ending a pregnancy and another who wants to deport 11 million migrants?" Now, in an ideal situation, the first thing that would have been done is the clarification of an absolute and a prudential moral issue. We cannot allow these two to be blurred. You see what the reporter did? This reporter, and perhaps for a reporter there can be an understanding, maybe this reporter doesn't know. Certainly anyone who has basic teaching in the faith, certainly someone who has studied theology should know the difference between an absolute moral issue and a prudential moral issue. Right? So they blurred. The question is leading. This reporter is leading the Holy Father, and he allows himself to be led, regrettably. The Holy Father responds, both are against life. The one who throws out immigrants and the one that kills children. So here the Holy Father himself is equating the two. Wait a minute, killing children and throwing out immigrants, both are moral evils, but there's a hierarchy. Killing children is more serious than kicking out a migrant. The Holy Father continues, both are against life. I can't decide. I'm not American and won't go to vote there. But let it be clear, denying migrants the ability to work and receive hospitality is a sin, a grave sin. The Old Testament speaks repeatedly of the orphan, the widow, and the stranger migrants. These are the three that Israel must care for. Failing to care for migrants is a sin against life and humanity. And the Holy Father is completely correct. There are only 4 sins that cry to heaven for vengeance, and one of them is the mistreatment of a migrant. If you have someone here in the United States who is not here with legal status and you purposely employ them and you underpay them because they cannot appeal to law, that is a grave sin. That is a sin that cries to heaven for vengeance. So those 4 sins in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, those are sins that cry to heaven for vengeance. So we can say they're like particularly grave sins. And again, one of them is to mistreat a migrant. So the Holy Father there is appealing to this part of our moral tradition. The Holy Father continues. Then abortion. Science says that at 1 month after conception, all the organs of a human being are present, everything. Having an abortion is killing a human being. Whether you like the word or not, it's murder. The Church is not closed-minded because it forbids abortion. The Church forbids abortion because it kills. It is murder. It is murder. So the Holy Father there is being very clear. And I will say that compared to his comments in terms of immigration, abortion is a lot stronger when he's commenting about abortion. That reflects our moral tradition. There's this hierarchy. The Holy Father continues. And we need to be clear about this. Sending migrants away, not allowing them to grow, not letting them have life is something wrong. It is cruelty. Sending a child away from the womb of the mother is murder because there is life. And we must speak clearly about these things. We must speak clearly about these things. I wish this was a little clearer, don't you? We must speak clearly about these things. No, but, both things are clear. This is obviously a transcript. The Holy Father is just repeating words at this point. Both things are clear. Are they? Both things are clear. The orphan, the stranger, and the widow. Do not forget this. So at the end, it appeared that the Holy Father just wasn't sure where to take his comments, because you could see he kind of concludes with just multiple different things that, well, aren't clear. Right? What the Holy Father is telling us is that immigration is important. The way we treat people, the people who come to our country in order to make life better for themselves and their loved ones, we have to support that. There's a difference between legal immigration and illegal immigration. And by the way, the Holy Father later in a different interview said that there are times where illegal immigrants must be sent back. They must be deported. So the Holy Father there is supporting the right of the local state to enforce their laws. Just the Holy Father goes on to say that prosperous nations should be generous in their immigration policies. As the United States, we've always been pro-immigrant. The regrettable part, however, is now we have legal immigration and illegal immigration. That causes a major problem. And the Holy Father there is saying how the orphan is treated has to be taken very seriously. Regrettably, however, he's equating this to abortion. And again, these are different moral issues, different levels. We have prudential moral issues and we have absolute moral issues. And here, abortion is an absolute. The report is not done. She concludes with this. In your opinion, Your Holiness, are there circumstances in which it is morally permissible to vote for a candidate who is in favor of abortion? The Holy Father concludes, in political morality, it is generally said that not voting is ugly. It's not good. One must vote. And one must choose the lesser evil. Which is the lesser evil? That lady or that gentleman? And by the way, in Italian, to refer to a woman as lady is not as derogatory as it sounds in English. So there's a translation here, but it doesn't have the connotation it does in English. So when he says that man, that lady or that gentleman, it doesn't have the force behind it that it does in English. Which is the lesser evil, that lady or that gentleman? I don't know. Each person must think and decide according to their own conscience. So those are the comments of the Holy Father, and this is what we see the national media running with, right? Pope says both candidates anti-life. Pope says support this particular candidate. Pope says neither candidate good, and so on. But we have to listen to what the Holy Father is saying, try to understand what he's saying, and then support it with our moral tradition. Right now we have to go to our conscience, make sure our conscience is well formed, assess both political parties and the candidate himself or herself, apply our moral truth, and then choose the lesser of the two evil. And then after we vote, we say a prayer to the Holy Spirit that whatever we have done may serve the greater good, the common good. That whatever decisions the candidate we have voted for, whatever that the decisions are made, that they will always be for the good of humanity. So that's our task, dear friends, as Catholic Christians. That's the difficult task of walking through the voting process. And it's a task that we are called to do. I want to stress it's a moral duty. As Catholics, we vote. We are expected to vote. Our vote matters. It's important. It's both important for the common good. It's important as well for a clear conscience. So I hope that these thoughts have helped you as you prepare for Election Day. Make sure you're registered to vote. Make sure you vote. And make sure you go to your conscience. Weigh all that has been presented by moral truth. And then cast your vote.